something like that. And you can kind of look at this chart and see, well, your savings rate, if you saved, let's say 10% of your income, if you followed traditional advice and saved 10% of your income, well, you're gonna be working for like 45 years of your life. But if you save 50% of your income, all of a sudden it cuts it down to 17 years. And so this difference is a huge, huge factor. Well, how do you do this? There's two ways. You can either cut back, but the thing is, you can only cut back so much when it comes to reducing your expenses. So instead, what we focus.
I love this podcast because it crushes your dreams of getting rich quick.
They actually got me into reading stats for anything.
You're tuned in to the Investing for Beginners podcast.
Led by Andrew Sather and Dave Ahern.
Step-by-step premium investing guidance for beginners.
Your path to financial freedom starts now.
Welcome to the Investing for Beginners podcast. I have another special episode for you guys. If you remember back in the archives, we had Andrew Giancola. He is back from the Personal Finance podcast. Great to see you, Andrew, and I'm excited to talk about your academy, but thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back.
All right, so you have this wealth builder journey. How did that come to be?
So the way that we started to think about this was I had a lot of people asking me, well, what do I do next based on my certain financial situation? And so what I wanted to do was create these steps that allowed people to, no matter what situation they were in, they knew what to do next. So my entire goal was to make this as easy as possible. And when it comes to anything, when it comes to personal finance, my entire goal is to create simplicity for people. And so what this is basically a step-by-step guide on what you need to do next. So if you are in debt, it tells you what to do next if you need to pay off debt. Or if you are trying to invest, it tells you when to invest and what foundations you need before you invest. So this is kind of the impetus of why this started. And we were getting such a high volume of questions from people in various situations. And I wanted to make it easy for them to know what they need to do next. So it's essentially just an order that shows you, based on your situation, what you need to do.
Awesome. Can you give the backstory of your podcast? I don't think we talked about that before, but what caused you to start it in the first place?
So our entire goal with the podcast in 2020, so I started in 2020. It was the middle of COVID. And it was one of those things where I had this blog for years. I had a personal finance blog and not many people read it, but I kept doing it every single month. And I was, working on this blog because I just had a passion for personal finance. And eventually a bunch of people said, hey, you should start a podcast. And they were telling me that back in 2018 and 2019. And I said, no, but I listened to a lot of podcasts. I actually owe podcasts partially as a big goal overall for me. Was podcasts were a big portion of, my education early on. And so when I started, listening to podcasts, it was one of those things where I knew the podcasts that I loved and I knew the podcasts that I didn't like so much. And so when we started to kind of start the show, I started in 2020 because we had a little extra time like everybody else did during COVID, started the show. And my first time I ever did an episode, I ended up doing 40 takes because I didn't know you could kind of mess up and re-say something and edit it out at some certain point in time. And so that's kind of where I started. And then we started it just to help people. My entire goal was to help as many people as possible just understand this stuff, understand how personal finance works, understand how their money works, and let them know that you can achieve financial freedom if you have this right plan in place. And so we started the show early and started to think through, well, what are some of the topics people would be very interested in? And so we started to take this kind of step by step on exactly what they needed to do. So now we built out over the years, all these different frameworks that I think are some of the areas that really are step by step that help people. And so that was the goal at the beginning. And so after the first year or so, we started to finally get a little bit of a listenership and some traction. And people started to share it with their friends and their family. And that's how it started to grow from there. But early on, our entire goal, and still our entire goal, is to bring people as much value as possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. What were some of the early podcasts you remember listening to that inspired you?
So some of the earliest ones one was Dole Roller. So I don't know if you guys have ever remembered Dole Roller. Rob Berger's on YouTube now, and he's the host of Dole Roller back then, and he's got a fantastic YouTube channel too. That was one that I listened to a lot. Another one was Radical Personal Finance by Joshua Sheets, which is still going. And Radical Personal Finance was a show that did some real deep dives on personal finance. Then I remember listening early on to Paula's first episode I remember listening to. Back then it was called The Money Show, and then she changed it to The Afford Anything Show. That was a really cool show that we listened to a ton. Stacking Benjamins was one that we listened to. all the time that was, entertaining, but also had a lot of good financial education. And so this was back when I was also just kind of reading a lot of blogs like Mr. Money Mustache and those types of blogs, and really interested in those. But then on the investing side, there was things like Market Foolery and Motley Fool Money, which are kind of co-shows that go together that I listen to basically every single day, and or Motley Fool Money every single week. And there was a lot of other just kind of small investing shows that we listened to just like that. So those were some that I remember, I was in my first entry-level job making $30,000 per year as a financial analyst. And I'm working in my cubicle and I'm listening to all these different personal finance and investing shows, thinking through, well, listen, financial independence is something that anybody in this world can achieve if they have an understanding of what to do.
That's funny. My story is similar. I remember back in 2013 doing my cubicle job and listening to Motley Fool Money. And that was back in the days when they had, I'm blanking on what the song was, but it was like money, 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 something like that.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
I do. And it was like, I remember Chris Hill's voice, like he had like this calming voice while I'm working. I'm like in the middle of, like trying to type all this stuff up, and they had all these characters. And if you remember back then, like Morgan Housel was on that show back in the day.
Right.
Which she never talks about now, but like it's one of those areas where it's pretty interesting, some of the talent that they had there that I think is really powerful.
Yeah, it is. It's funny how much, I don't know if they know how much they've impacted people like you and I, but it's been, podcasting's been quite an amazing thing, and it continues to grow. So let's say somebody comes to you and they are in that journey of, all right, I've got my big boy job, my big girl job. What do I do next? Right. So like, what would be the wealth builder journey framework for somebody who's brand new in a career?
So we have the wealth builder journey in 5 phases. And the way that we think about this is, first, we want you to build out your foundation. So your financial foundation is the huge key overall just to get set up and started. And so because that foundation, really what we have in there is to first just get your account set up. So obviously it's your checking, your savings account, those types of things. We all kind of know what that is. And then the second thing that we want you to do is get your bucket system set up. So the bucket system is basically a savings system that allows you to get started on things like your emergency fund or any big savings goals or anything that you really need to save cash for. And the reason why it's called the bucket system is because we like to find high yield savings accounts that have either segmented budgeted buckets inside of them. So Ally Bank is an example, or SoFi is an example, where you can actually compartmentalize where your savings is going. Now, the reason why we do this is because we can automate this process, and automation is a huge portion of why we do pretty much everything that we do in Master Money and Master Money Academy, and everything that we do over there is we want to automate as much of this process as possible. So when we set up a bucketing system like that, I'll set up something like an emergency fund. And obviously, when we talk about emergency funds, we really want people to do that first and upfront, is start to save towards their emergency fund. And so we have something called the 1-3-6 method, which is kind of how to think about and how to save for your emergency fund. So let's say, for example, you set up a high yield savings account and you first want to save up 1 month of expenses in an emergency fund. Well, with the bucketing system, when you use Ally or SoFi or some of these other places, you can set up a category that's, hey, this is my emergency fund. You can set up another category that this is my home down payment savings. Another one that is for, hey, market downturn fund or whatever it is. And you can set these different buckets up and automate into those different savings buckets. So that's the second one, is to get your buckets set up in there and then just start to save towards those. Then we think about things like just setting up our spending system. So our credit cards are a big portion of that. Or if you don't believe in credit cards, you can go to debit cards too. But I believe in just, using your credit cards, paying them off in full every single month, and getting the points and rewards on there. And then from there, when we're thinking about our financial foundation, then we go through and calculate our retirement number. So those are the first 4 steps that we go through early on in the wealth builder's journey. Now, I think that most people need to be calculating their retirement number every single year, which is why this is very early on in the process. And so really, the number one thing I want you to do with your money when you get started is get those things set up. Then once those are set up, it's starting to save in that emergency fund. So I mentioned the 1-3-6 method. This is saving 1 month of expenses first. And so the 1 stands for 1 month of expenses. And so this is thinking through, okay, if we have, if I'm making $10,000 every single month net after all expenses and everything else, then I want to make sure I have $10,000 in an emergency fund saved up. Once you have that set up, Then you want to pay off any high interest debt. So anything like, a credit card debt or anything like a personal loan or anything that's above a 6% interest rate outside of your mortgage. And we can categorize student loans in there too in some caveats. But anything outside of that, we want to make sure that we are getting paid off. And typically this is for those folks who are in credit card debt, getting that stuff paid off so that we can focus on building wealth and we can focus on taking those extra dollars and putting them towards investments, putting them towards the rest of our emergency fund and making sure we are actually putting those dollars towards wealth building activities. So that's the big key up front, is to get the ball rolling and then get the starter emergency fund in place. So that's kind of how we start the first foundation of the wealth builder's journey, is setting it up by making sure you have some cash on hand to protect you against anything in life, getting some of that debt pay down, and then we move on to some of the other steps.
Yeah, makes sense. Kind of sweeping the floor, getting things in order, and then doing big things after. So you mentioned the retirement number. Why is that so important to you? Why do you think it makes such a impactful difference for somebody to calculate?
The reason why this is so important is because this is your freedom number. And once you realize this exists and that there is a target that you can hit, it will change your entire perspective when you look at your finances. I cannot tell you how many people we have go through the wealth builder's journey who calculate the retirement number and they say, oh my goodness, I can get to this point in time. If I do the math and I work backwards, I can get and hit this number in the next 10, 20, 30 years, depending on what your savings rate is. It is not hopeless for me, and I can live the retirement that I actually want to live. But we calculate this early because I think people need to calculate the retirement number every single year. A lot of things will change over time. And you and I both know when you are, single and you're setting up and trying to think through, okay, well, how do I want to live my life? Well, my financial independence goals were very different when I was single. I was extremely frugal and I was going to live like Mr. Money Mustache and I was going to bike around town and never drive a car and do all these different things. Well, it's very different now than it was back then, because then I got married and all of a sudden the amount that I wanted to spend in retirement went up by a little bit. The goalpost moved a little bit. Then I had my first child and the goalpost moved a little bit more. And then I had 2 more kids and the goalpost moves a little bit more. And so tracking your retirement number on a yearly basis, make sure that you are on track in terms of thinking about what you want to do in retirement. But in addition, it's also going to adjust for things like inflation. It's going to help you adjust your spending based on that stuff. And really, it is the overall number that you need to be targeting. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I don't know how much I want to spend in retirement. But if we think about this in a way where we can kind of justify it based on certain numbers that we are hitting year in and year out right now, this is going to help us get to that point in time where we have a much more accurate number. What I don't want people to do is they get 10 years down the line and they haven't thought about their retirement number or tracked it at all. And now they're way off with their investing plan where they have to play catch up. That's the big key that we don't want to do, is we don't want to have to play catch up and have financial stress. Instead, we want to be doing this year in and year out so we have the target in place. So typically, like the back of the napkin math for folks out there who are trying to figure out what the retirement number is you can work backwards from the 4% rule. Now, I think the 4% rule is pretty conservative in terms of how most people are going to operate when it comes to retirement. And even Bill Bengen, the founder of the 4% rule, has kind of come out and said in a recent book that he thinks it's closer to 4.8, 4.9% now. But if you go back and look at the 4% rule, you can work backwards. So you can multiply, hey, how much do I want to spend in retirement? If you multiply or figure that number out, then you can multiply that by 25 and you can get your target number as a conservative, round, proven number. So the thought process here is if you want to spend $80,000 per year, multiply that by 25, that's $2 million that you need invested. Once you have $2 million invested, you are financially free if you want to spend $80,000 per year, because you can draw down 4% every single year. So this is the way that we kind of start to think about the retirement number. There are other nuances that we can add into play, like Social Security and pensions and healthcare costs. All those different things are going to matter. But that is the quick math that you can do right now and to try to figure out what your retirement number actually is.
Can we crack that a little bit? I'm curious about Social Security, because that's one of those things I feel like does not get talked about a lot, but it is a factor, right?
It's a huge factor. And really what the way that we have people look at this is they can figure out what their retirement number is or how much they want to spend. And then we can figure out and try to get an accurate depiction of what Social Security is going to be. Now, do we know exactly what it's going to be? We don't. So really, the most accurate number is going to be about 5 to 10 years out from retirement. But you can go right now and you can create an account on ssa.gov and you can start to get an estimate of what you think your Social Security could be. Now, There are a lot of things that are going to happen over the course of the next decade that they are having conversations about right now to see where this is actually going to land with Social Security. But if you're planning on having it and you're getting closer to that retirement age, you can start to run these numbers and see an accurate depiction of where that math is. Now, if you think that, okay, over the course of the next 15 or 20 years, I'm way farther out from retirement, and you think, well, at least I know I'm going to get $2,000 or $3,000, you can start to factor that number in. But when you are really far out, I don't start to factor in Social Security too deep until you get kind of closer. Once you get closer to 10 years in, then I'm really going to start to dial that in a lot more because you're more certain if it's going to exist or not. I like to focus on the things that I can control, and everything else, if you start to oversave for retirement, I don't think you're going to really worry about that at all. So making sure that you kind of are knowing what that number is and you get closer, then you can start to think through this. Now, when you are close and you have that Social Security number in place, what you can do is as you are starting to invest, you can reduce the amount that you need. So let's say, for example, that you are going to live off of you want to live off that $80,000 a year again, okay? If you have $80,000 and you have a $2 million portfolio, that means you could draw down 4% and have $80,000. But if you want to live off $40,000, but if you want to live off $80,000 per year and you're going to get $40,000 in Social Security, maybe it's for just you, maybe it's you and your spouse, then you're a lot closer to needing only $1 million invested in retirement to be able to retire. So this is the powerful thing for most people, is they're a lot closer than they actually think they are. And this is where there can be a huge shift in mindset. You wonder why all these retirees out there are able to retire because when they really don't have much in savings or in investments and most of their equities in their house. This is because they have Social Security and it covers a huge portion of their income. So I have seen a ton of retirees, even in Master Money Academy, who have been open about their Social Security numbers. And if they've been working for 30 or 40 years, a lot of them, depending on how much income they made, are making anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 to $6,000 every single month from Social Security. It's somewhere in that range currently right now. That you could think of if you are young, in the future, if Social Security still exists, we never know if it will be, but they've been saying it's been going away since the 60s. So that's one of those things that you just got to think through and kind of come to your own conclusion. But if you think it's going to be there, this could be a big impact overall to your retirement, where it can make a big difference in exactly how much you're planning. So you could have actual extra dollars by the time you get to retirement age, and Social Security is going to help you kind of give that bonus towards, vacations and those types of things. So that's kind of how I think about it for me, because I'm still so far out from retirement. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever retire, but if I do, or when I do, that's kind of the range where I think about it as an extra. It's the icing on top. It's the gravy because I have that longer time horizon. But if you're closer, then you can get a much, much more accurate number.
That's encouraging. If you're farther away, it's the icing on top of the cake. And if you have less time to save and compound, well, you do have that you can lean on. And maybe the situation's not as dire as some of the news places like to make it sound. So I like that framework. All right, we have a retirement number. What is the next step after that when it comes to making a financial plan?
So the big thing that we think about next is we think through, okay, well, now we want to make sure that we put together our blueprint. So the first part was our foundation. The next part is our blueprint. Where are we going? What are we going to be doing next? And how are we actually going to take action on some of this plan? And so first, we set up a spending plan. And typically, there's a couple of ways to do this. A spending plan is just a fancy name for a budget. And what you can do is one of two things. You can do one thing called the reverse budget, meaning you save off the top. You're saving the money that you're going to be investing or putting towards your emergency fund first. And then you spend what is left over. That's the simple way to do this. And it's the simple way for people who absolutely hate budgeting. You can go that route. But there's a second option where you can do a line by line item budget is what we call it. But it's basically doing something like a zero-based budget, where when money comes in, you allocate where those dollars are going to go within your budget. And then from there, you can figure out a spending plan based on what your personal goals are. So we walk people through kind of this step by step, and we use the tool called Monarch Money. There's a bunch of great tools out there. I've used YNAB in the past. There's a bunch of other awesome ones. You can use a spreadsheet if you want to spend $0 on a budgeting software. So there's a bunch of ways that you can do that. So for people who hate budgeting, I would recommend the reverse budget. If you know, like, I'm just never going to stick to this thing, then reverse budget is a great option. But if you are someone who wants to get in the weeds, you want to optimize, then doing something like a zero-based budget is my favorite way to do it. Then what we do is, once we have all this stuff set up, we start to calculate our net worth. And when we look at our net worth, one of the big things that we want to look for is, where are we starting and which direction do we want to go? So a lot of people, if you're just getting started, you're in debt, or you are just new to personal finance in general, and you took out some credit card debt, or you have a car loan, or maybe you have just a lot of debt on hand, you may have a negative net worth. And that's okay, because guess what? We're going to dig ourselves out of this hole. And the first step, like Warren Buffett says, the first thing to do when you're in a hole is to stop digging. And so when you want to think about this, we want to make sure that we want to grow this net worth over time. This is our scoreboard. This is our scorecard, and we want to see this overall. So if you don't know what your net worth is, it is the difference between your assets and your liabilities. So you take your assets, you subtract them by your liabilities, and that is your net worth. So your assets could be things like all of your stock investments. They could be things like your house. Some people factor in their car. There's a bunch of other things that you could put in there that are the value there, minus your liability. So things like your mortgage, things like your car notes, all of those different things would factor in to liabilities, and you figure out what your net worth is. There's a bunch of free tools out there that help you track this automatically. The Monarch Money, which I mentioned earlier, they also track it. There's a bunch of other options out there that can also track this automatically. And so we think about this, and we have this set up in a way where we are tracking what we need to be doing. And then next, what we do is we automate our money. So money automation is going to make sure, even if you like budgeting, or if you don't like budgeting, money automation is going to make sure you don't have to do much work whatsoever. And so when we automate our money, we think about this in a way where we are going to A, automate our investments, B, automate our savings, C, automate how we spend our dollars, so all of our bills and our spending plans. And so those three things, if you automate those three things up front, it's going to make everything else easier. I've had students come to me and say, I started to automate my money, and I'm an optimizer, and I don't know what to do with my hands. Like, I feel like I need to be doing something, but everything's already happening automatically. And that I love to hear, but also it's a little bit stressful for them. So they have to kind of get used to the process of all of this happening automatically. And then over time, they've gotten used to it. And they said, this is the best thing ever, because I'm not spending so much time on my money. Instead, I'm spending, 10, 15 minutes every single month. Instead, before I was spending 1 to 2 hours every single month. And so that saved them time, it saved them energy, and everything else there. And it's been one of those areas that has been important. And then the last step we do in the blueprint is we get our insurances set up. So all the insurances, proper insurances, from car insurance to life insurance, like we do term life insurance typically is what we usually recommend, which is just looking at things in a different way. It's a much cheaper form of insurance. We have talking through home insurance, all those different things, how to shop those insurances and that kind of stuff. So the blueprint stage is where we're going to start taking action. We've getting our plan in place, and we're starting to get some motion going. And that is where we see a big difference for people, where they're checking off some of these boxes and they're making sure they're actually getting progress. So you got their foundation set up, and then you've got momentum happening.
That's awesome. We've talked about the foundation, talked about the blueprint. Based on the people who have been in your academy, is there an area or like a speed bump in that process where you've seen students have to work through, and how have they worked through it in that process? So
early on, the biggest portion for people is they want to figure out which budget direction do they need to go in. They're trying to figure out, hey, what do I need to do next? And what they'll realize is it doesn't really matter which one you choose, as long as you choose the one that fits your personality best, because the automation is going to take care of it. So once you get to the automation stage, this is going to help you dramatically take care of everything, where you don't have to think so much about your money. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to automate all these different portions, and then you're just making sure that it's going in the right place. And so it helps with the budget, it helps with making sure you're tracking your spending, and it helps them kind of get over that hurdle. In fact, honestly, for most people, if they really hate budgeting and they set up automations, it's going to help them. They honestly have to spend almost no time. We do something called the 5-minute drill for the optimizers, where they will look at this and they'll spend 5 minutes every single day categorizing their expenses when it comes to the budget. And that's it. And usually it takes them 1 to 2 minutes. And so they schedule a time every day. Usually it's like, what I tell a lot of them is like, hey, the first 5 minutes of your lunch break, go ahead and start to categorize all your expenses. And if you just spend 5 minutes every single day, you will have literally the perfect budget. If you are someone who is really optimized and has to go in there and get in the weeds, you'll have the perfect budget, and you'll still be spending way less time than you ever did before.
I wonder how many hours you are saving people of like just obsessing over every little thing, and just that the freedom that is in that of give me enough time to optimize like I want to, and then the rest of the time I have to live my life.
This is one of my favorite things, because I watch it unlock for people, and I watch them start to automate all this stuff. And at first, it seems as though it's too easy, and they don't know. Like I said, they don't know what to do, and they feel like they should be doing something. But then once they get comfortable with this, and after a month or two, all of a sudden they see that everything is working perfectly, and they just don't have to think about it. And the amazing thing is anybody out there who has like invested in their company's 401k. If you've ever done that before and you've gone like a year without really looking at your 401k, and then a year later you look at it and you're like, wow, I can't believe there's that much money in there. That's automation. That's what happens when you automate your dollars, is that it just automatically goes into those investments. And as you know, investments grow over time. They compound over time. And it is just such a powerful thing. And if you do this across all of your finances, all of a sudden everything's going to grow. It's going to compound. And really, you don't have to think about it anymore, because the big problem is you. It's your willpower. And when your willpower gets in the way, nothing is ever going to happen. Nothing's ever going to get done. So when you remove your willpower from that equation, then all of a sudden it all unlocks and everything just starts working.
Just make it easy. Just get the easy button.
Exactly.
So, all right, foundation blueprint. What's next?
So then we do what we call the wealth protector. And what we do here is, this is when we're going to get started investing, meaning we're going to get started with getting our employer match. So that's going to be one of the areas that we want you to do early, because it's usually a 100% rate of return. In some instances, it could be a 50% rate of return, but it is free money. It is literally free money that you get when you get your employer match. So everybody listening right now, we always want you to get your employer match as early as you possibly can. And honestly, even if you are just getting started and you're like, I don't know what to do first, just get your employer match first. It is always one of those things that you want to make sure that you're doing, as long as it's vested and those types of things. And then what we do is we create our full-on plan to find money. So if you're in debt, for example, or you are someone who's like, I don't know how to really get my emergency fund funded fast enough because it takes a really long time. When you're in those situations, we do things called finding money. So we do things like we negotiate our bills, and we teach people how to negotiate their bills and all the bills you can negotiate, which, newsflash, you can negotiate most of your bills if you really, really try. Things like your mortgage or your power bill, you're not gonna be able to negotiate, but things that are out there like your cable bill or your cell phone bill, or there's a bunch of other bills out there, like your insurance is a huge one that we teach all the time, where we see people saving themselves thousands of dollars every year from negotiating their insurance. All of those are really, really powerful things that help you find money. And so let's say, for example, you do some exercises where you negotiate your bills, you sell some things from your garage on eBay, you do all these different things. All of a sudden, you have a bunch of extra cash on hand. You can put it towards those early financial goals, your emergency fund, or maybe your investment accounts, or whatever your early financial goals are. You can start to take those extra dollars and hit those steps that you need to hit. And so when we find money, that's a big thing that we talk through then. And then after we get through these stages, I can go into nuances, but after we get through these stages, then we hit our 3-month emergency fund. So you've heard me talk about the 1-3-6 method. It's 1 month of expenses is saved first, pay off high interest debt. Then we get to 3 months of expenses. And once we have that 3 months of expenses saved up, that's when we really start to aggressively go towards our investments. And really, the 3 months is just there to protect you against life. If anything were to happen in life, that is what that is there for. And then after we hit that, then we really are going to go aggressive on investing. And I'm a huge proponent of investing early and often. And so the faster we can get to this point in time, this is going to help us not get derailed or have to stop compounding at any point in time. Instead, we have that 3 months in place, and now we can start to invest.
Makes sense. Let's just wade into the weeds a little bit.
Sure.
Let's talk investments. I know you talk about ETFs on your YouTube channel and things like that. Could you share some of your favorites and why?
Sure. So typically, whenever I'm building like a portfolio, I'm typically looking at a couple of different things. First, when I build a portfolio, I want that big anchor fund. So I usually will look at like BOO, which is the S&P 500 ETF, or VTI, which is Vanguard's Total Index ETF, or something like QQQM, which is, the NASDAQ. And so I'll look at a big anchoring portion of the portfolio. We call that the anchor. And so when I look at that, I am usually trying to find something that has just been proven over time. So usually, let's just take the middle ground of the S&P 500. So VOO would be the first portion I look at. Then I say to myself, well, what else would I want to add in? And so you can build portfolios in a bunch of different ways based on your risk tolerance or how you think about the market. And so you can add things in, like if you are bullish on technology, you can add, things in like a tech ETF, like Vanguard's got a great one that's outperformed all those funds I just said. Or you can look at something like VIG, which is a dividend ETF, if you want some income coming in, or if you're looking for international exposure, you can do some international ETF. But really, it comes down to how you want to craft that portfolio and what matters most to you. For example, I used to do the traditional Boglehead 3-fund portfolio where I would have something like VTI or VOO. Then I would pair it with an international fund. And then I would pair it with a bond fund. And I realized pretty quickly, well, the international fund is dramatically underperforming the rest. And what I did was I looked at the top 10 holdings and I said to myself, well, if I had these top 10 holdings in the US market, would I be happy holding those stocks? Yes. If I had the top 10 holdings in the international market, would I be happy holding those stocks? Not all of them. I wouldn't want to hold those individually. And so I started to compare them a little bit and decide if I wanted to hold international stocks. Now, I think that there's a lot of people out there that can hold international stocks and they should be interested in that. For me personally, though, I made the decision that I'm not going to hold, as much as I was, or in that allocation as much as I was. And so I hold a lot less international ETFs than I used to. And then I had those bond funds. And in those bond funds, those are something that I think for people who want to weather out any downturns or any storms, that's something you definitely can hold if you were looking at holding bonds. But I hold a lot less bond funds than I did early on because I've developed an investor style where I am willing to have a much more aggressive portfolio because my time horizon is longer. And so because my time horizon is longer, that's the way I think about it. So I hold the majority of my index funds and ETFs now in some of those big, US equity funds because I want to have that growth, because that long-term growth is something that historically has been outperforming all of these other funds. Then once I get to the point in time where I am getting close to retirement or in retirement, I may add in some more bond exposure at that point in time because I see it as two different phases. There is the growth phase and then there's the preservation phase. And the preservation phase is more so for when you're in retirement or living off that portfolio. Then I may add in some more bond exposure. But like recently, for example, we just had JL Collins on the podcast last week and had a conversation with him. And he's still, the majority of his portfolio is still VTI, and he's 75 now. It's just very interesting to kind of see the risk tolerance for different people. And if your portfolio is large enough, or if you have more money than you think you need, you can stay exposed into some of these. It just depends on exactly where you want to land.
Do you have conversations, whether it's people in the academy or just in general, of the whole retire early conversation and what that looks like? And, no, if that's on people's radars. I mean, you and I, we kind of do things that we love, right? But for some people, retiring early sounds like the best thing ever. So how are people achieving that these days?
Exactly. It is a huge, huge thing on people's mind. And it is a big thing inside Master Money Academy that people want to achieve. Whether it is, there's some folks who want to retire early and aggressively in their 40s. And then we have some who are I just want to retire at 55. I want those extra 5 years in order to make sure I can get to that point in time where I'm not, working until I'm in my 60s. And so for the folks who don't love their job, there's a lot of them in Master Money Academy that are working towards that. And so the way that we work towards that and we think through it is, okay, one of the things that needs to go up is your savings rate. Your savings rate is actually a huge, massive factor in how soon you can retire. And so there's this chart way back in the day that Mr. Money Mustache did, and he called it the simple math behind early retirement. It's something like that. And you can kind of look at this chart and see, well, your savings rate, if you saved, let's say, 10% of your income, if you followed traditional advice and saved 10% of your income, well, you're going to be working for 45 years of your life. But if you save 50% of your income, all of a sudden it cuts it down to 17 years. And so this difference is a huge, huge factor. Well, how do you do this? There's two ways. You can either cut back, but the thing is, you can only cut back so much when it comes to reducing your expenses. So instead, what we focus on in Master Money Academy is, hey, sure, you can cut back early enough, like we just talked about, negotiating your bills and or cutting back some of your expenses. But then we want to focus on the income side because we want you to live your dream life, the life that you actually want to live. And we want to increase our income over time. And so we can take that extra increased income and we can put it towards our financial freedom, the thing that we truly value. Because we're a huge proponent of hey, if you want to spend more money on cars, you want to spend more money on things that you love, that's absolutely fantastic. But just know the trade-off that you're making is your freedom. And if you want financial freedom, that's your number one priority, then putting more of those dollars towards freedom is going to be the big thing. So we're not focusing on increasing our income so we could buy more stuff. We're focusing on increasing our income so we could spend on what we value, whether that is freedom or stuff. It depends on what that is. That's how we think about it and how we kind of get towards that goal. So your savings rate is the biggest proponent when it comes to financial independence. And then you think about, okay, well, what accounts do I need to be saving in order to achieve financial independence? Well, there's a couple of different options. The easiest one, though, is the taxable brokerage, just because when you look at the taxable brokerage, That's the most flexible funds. When you have them in there, you can invest them over time. You can pull them out at any given time. And they are pretty tax efficient. In fact, you could probably get up to, depending on if you're married or if you're single, if you're married, you can get up to about $120,000 roughly out of your taxable brokerage in any given year in retirement without having to pay taxes on it because of the standard deduction and then some of the other stuff that's available there. And so because of that, it's actually a pretty tax efficient fund for early retirees. But there's also things like the rule of 55. There's other ways to get your money out of some of these retirement accounts. You can do Roth conversions that really are ways that you can get them out even if you retire early. But the taxable brokerage is kind of the easiest path to get there. And so we try to think through, okay, well, if we utilize this and we invest conservatively, how are we going to think about this? And so they start to build out their plan based on that.
Amazing to hear. It's one of those things. If you are in personal finance long enough, you learn that the savings rate is so key. And I love all the different techniques, principles, mindsets that you've shared just on this episode to help people get there. Can you tell us I'm just going to assume, and maybe I'm wrong, so you can correct me, but I'm going to assume that like being in an academy and being around other people who are all chasing like, how can we get better savings rates, helps towards making progress in that. Can you speak to if that's something that you've seen, and just tell us about your academy in general?
That's a huge thing that we've seen. So we've seen other people kind of motivate each other. They create friendships. But the coolest thing that we do, and one of the things that we do, is I coach them weekly inside the academy. That's one of the things I do live, is every single week I coach them and we do group coaching. They can ask any questions. Everybody's really involved, which is cool. But then we also launched small groups. And in these small groups, it's people focused or working towards a common goal. So for example, we have a small group right now of folks who are beginner investors. So they're just learning how to invest and they're all kind of working towards that common goal. So we have our courses in there like Index Fund Pro, which is like teaching you how to invest in index funds and ETFs from a basic level, like a starting point. And so they'll take those courses together, then they'll talk about it and have conversations, then they'll ask questions in the group coaching calls. And so it's this perpetual cycle of them learning, taking action, and motivating each other. And that is our entire goal with this. There's another group who is working on paying off specific debt that they want to get paid off. There's another group that is working towards high income activity. So they are looking at some side hustles. They are looking at some side businesses. And we have seen people launch side businesses just from this small group. There's another group that is working on travel hacking. They want to travel more. And so they're working on, credit card rewards and points and those types of things. And so we have all these different small groups. We have one on goals that just launched in January where everybody's working towards their common goals, keeping each other motivated with their specific goals. And they're going to kind of meet throughout the entire year. And so in these small groups, they're all kind of working together, and it is so cool to see them communicate. But then we have these sections like where people can just ask questions, and all of a sudden, at the beginning, I was answering all the questions, but now you see all the folks who have been in the community for the last couple of months, they're all able to answer all the questions as if it were me. And it's just so interesting because they've learned so much early on that it's just a very powerful way where people are learning from each other, and it is just so cool to watch them grow.
That's awesome. Tell us about your podcast. There are people out there who still want to learn from you, even if there's competition in your community. But talk about your podcast and how people can find that as well.
Absolutely. So our podcast is called the Personal Finance Podcast, and we have it 2 episodes every single week. And it is one where we talk about just personal finance, investing. We have a bunch of different frameworks that we talk about, and even income growth and side hustles, those types of things. And it is a show that my goal is to create 1 million millionaires. That's the entire goal when we started. And so our thought process is, hey, we want to give you those frameworks, those action steps that you can take in order to achieve those goals overall. So that is the Personal Finance Podcast. It's on any podcast player. Would love to have anybody who wants to listen on that show as well.
Yeah, highly recommend it. Couldn't recommend it more. And if you guys want to hear Dave and I back in the day, you can go look in the archives and hear when we were on that show and probably made a fool of ourselves there. So Andrew, it was so great to have you. Again, thank you for being so forward with all the different ideas and mindsets and everything. I know there's at least something that anybody can take away from the conversation today. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And Andrew, if any of your listeners want to join Master Money Academy, I'll send you a link. I'll give them a free trial for they can test it out, see if it's even for them. And if they're interested in that, we'll give them a free trial so they can check it out and kind of get on some coaching calls and see if it works for them.
Awesome. We will put that in the show notes. So that is going to wrap us up for today. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. You know where to find us. Invest with a margin of safety, emphasis on the safety. Have a great week, and we will talk to you next time.
We hope you enjoyed this content. 7 Steps to Understanding the Stock Market shows you precisely how to break down the numbers in an engaging and readable way with real-life examples. Get access today at stockmarketpdf.com. Until next time, have a prosperous day. The information contained is for general information and educational purposes only. It is not intended for a substitute for legal, commercial, and/or financial advice from a licensed professional. Review our full disclaimer at einvestingforbeginners.com.